surprised. So our next speaker will be tackling this amongst other things. He's Executive Director of the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute at the Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University. For more than 25 years, Rhett has held successful leadership and management roles. He has been involved in many entrepreneurial ventures, innovation initiatives, and over $30 billion of transactions, including early and growth stage business investments. He's also chairman and CEO of Deal Tech Limited, which he founded in 1999 and sits on the board of several startups. From 2005 to 2010, he served as senior team leader strategic development for Google, where he was chief designer and negotiator of large strategic acquisition and development projects for Google's global infrastructure. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rhett L. Weiss.
Good afternoon, good morning. Doesn't sound quite right, does it? It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. To amplify a little bit about my background so you just know the context of what I'm about to say, although I'm the head of an entrepreneurship institute at an academic institution, I'm not an academic. I come from the trenches, the School of Hard Knocks. I have been involved in a number of startups, some successful, some not so successful, some grew tremendously. I've had exits. I've been the little guy in the negotiations. I've been the big guy. So what I'm about to share with you are the sort of the common perspectives. The purpose of this is not to pretend that an entrepreneur, like when Jane was starting out, a small team with an idea somehow can equal the playing field with a real big player like that big store that she was showing. Maybe you don't equal the playing field, but you can compete. You can get on the playing field and be effective. And so if I don't say it again at the end, I hope you remember what I just said. I'm not pretending that somehow everybody's an equal in these negotiations, but I also want you to walk away with this idea, those of you who are entrepreneurs and dealing with this, how do I go up against big players? That you can. It's not so intimidating. So this is the scene, right? This is basically, if you're the entrepreneur, this is sometimes how it looks to you. You know, how am I going to deal with this big player, get their attention, and get a decent deal when I feel like I don't really have much to offer? I don't have the same money, I don't have maybe the same time, I don't maybe have the same human resources, the same amount of experts, maybe the same access to information. Okay, so you're sort of talking yourself out of how well can you really do. So how do you do it? How do you negotiate with the big players? It's the same way you eat an elephant. So raise your hand if you now want to know, how do you eat an elephant? Raise your hand if you're wondering, what the hell is this guy talking about? The way you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. You just break down the negotiations into its component parts, and you look at where maybe you do have an advantage, or at least you have an opportunity to make an impact with the other side. So we're going to spend a few minutes on this slide. There's a lot here, and I know we have very limited time, so I'm not going to drill into a lot of detail. But basically, this is missing a lot of, here we go. All negotiations have three forces at work. It doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur negotiating with another entrepreneur or a set of entrepreneurs, whether you're a founder bringing in 3 or 4 co-founders. It doesn't matter, entrepreneur, big player, big player, big player, government, industry, whatever combination of parties you put together, these parts are at work. And each participant in that negotiation has some amount of this. Not equal amounts. Again, go back to my earlier point. I'm not pretending everybody's an equal in this, but everyone has some amount of each one of these three, and they flow. They move back and forth during the negotiations. You don't enter the negotiation the way you exit the negotiation. You may come in as perceived as the most powerful player, and you may end not so powerful anymore. You may come in armed with a bunch of information. You think you know everything there is to know about this deal, and in the course of the negotiation you realize there is a lot more to know. And in fact, the other party has some information you really need. So let me break this down. The first two, information and time, hopefully are going to seem pretty apparent. The power part of this is a little bit more fuzzy. So we heard a lot today already about big data and so on. And basically by information, I'm just referring to data you can use or you need to use to make an effective deal, whether it's building a strategic alliance, it's licensing technology, it's creating your founding team, whatever. Information plays a role, but information is not just one thing. From the negotiator's perspective, there are 4 types of information, and I've listed them here. The first one being what we frankly spent a lot of time on today already. It's out there. Anybody can get to it. It's on the internet. Whether you're a big player or a little player, you have access to it. So remember that as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of information that's going to go into this negotiation that you have just as much access to as the big players. It's a question of, do you get to it? Do you use it? Do you have the time to use it? There's going to be information that you need from the other side, and they can't give it to you because of trade secret reasons or other sensitive reasons. They just can't share it. So you're going to have to figure out how to solve your issues without that information. And likewise, you may have information the other player wants, you can't share it. You're afraid it's just going to compromise your technical know-how too much. Let's go to time. Again, hopefully this is intuitive. All negotiations have a certain time frame within which they really should occur. Otherwise, if it just goes on too long, people get what's called deal fatigue. They just get tired of the negotiations. Never mind, this isn't worth all the time and effort. But time has another component to it too, and that's the timing. It's when you do something during that time frame. Picture an athletic competition, a soccer game, a football game. You know how long the game's supposed to go, but what you do with your players and how you play the game during it matters too. Power. Again, power is not, it's like information, it's not one thing. It's really 7 things, kind of wrapped into one. I'm going to just take a minute running down this. When I give longer workshops, we explore these concepts more and actually demonstrate them more. Title, the power of the title. Basically, it's what's on somebody's business card. Without more, when you sit down at the table, does that business card say CEO or executive director? Does it say junior deputy vice president of nothingness? You know, what's on that card? And you could be a 20-something CEO, and you could be across the table from, the assistant vice president of some big company who's been in that company 20 years. This was touched on a moment ago. Who has the decision-making power when you look at the cards? You look at that not-so-strong card, and you say, this person may be responsible for negotiating, but maybe doesn't have the authority to make the final decision. Reward and punishment. It's the ability to give the other side what it wants or to withhold what it wants. So an entrepreneur may have something the big player wants. You have power if you have something they want, or can withhold something they want. Maybe they don't know it yet. Maybe that's part of the sales process, is interesting them in what technology or what widget you have, and then they start to get more curious about it. You develop power by being able to give them that thing or not give them that thing. Consistency. This is a little bit counterintuitive. It's the ability to develop power even as a small player by being consistent about your position, not jumping all over the map. And if you do make changes, you can always track that change back to what you had originally said. The reason we're now telling you something differently this week than last week is you said something to us that now factors into the equation, but without that, we would be saying the same thing we said last week. Maybe another way to look at it is you lose power if you look inconsistent. If you seem to not know what you're doing, you're kind of just going with the wind instead of having a clear direction, you're going to look weaker. And often entrepreneurs aren't really sure what to say and what to do when, and so they do seem to be bouncing around. They're just hurting themselves. An entrepreneur can have the same strategic vision in a negotiation as the big player. And I know some of you in the room, like me, may have been through this process many times. You've been an entrepreneur many times over. You actually are pretty experienced at this. But maybe the perception of the other side looking at you is, oh, you've been in business how many months now? Do you really know what you're doing? You're going to help answer that question, yes, I know what I'm doing, by being consistent about what you say and do. Charisma, you all, I think, know what that is. It's just the power of somebody's personality. When they walk into the room, or when they, open their mouths on the phone, you can just feel the personality. Expertise. Do you know a lot about software coding? Are you an expert in a certain material? Are you an expert in a certain academic subject? You can, of course, gain power or lose power depending on how you use your expertise. But I would say that being an expert does not in and of itself make you a strong negotiator. You may be started your startup because you're a world's leading expert on a certain subject. That by itself won't make you an effective negotiator. Situation has basically two meanings. It's the power you derive from a physical situation. Are you in your office, or are you in somebody else's office? Are you on your home court, their home court, or neutral territory? Did everybody fly to a hotel near an airport just to have a meeting, and it's really nobody's home court advantage? The other aspect of situation is just generally what's going on around everybody. For instance, the recent hurricane that hit the New York City area and New Jersey, it was extremely devastating. Awful situation for a lot of people. Now, anybody selling, say, a diesel generator is in a much better, more powerful position just because of the situation everybody's finding themselves in. And information, the adage, knowledge is power. So all those 7 elements also move back and forth in negotiation. An entrepreneur should not think that it has, or he has none of those, or even if the person has some, that it's less than the big player. That may be true, may not be true. So where does it come from? Where does negotiation power come from? First is perception. Is the entrepreneur really the weaker party in this? Do you think that just because? Or is it true? I don't know if in the back you can see the cartoon, but it's the good old, the glass is half full, glass is half empty. It's how people look at a situation. People can look at the very same situation quite differently. Knowing the process. I'll touch on this more in a moment, but negotiation is a process. It's not an event. It's not one email. It's not one pitch, not one presentation. It's the same process, whether you're the little entrepreneur or the big multinational company. And confidence. Just basically being confident in your abilities to substantiate your positions, to craft a sensible deal for all parties, instead of saying, look, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, we're just going to give this a try, we really need to make this sale. So all of that together comprises your on button, basically. All of you entrepreneurs in the room have this button. Find it, press it, turn it on, and use it throughout the process. I promised a moment ago I was going to say a little bit about the process. Here it is. Again, in a bigger workshop, I spent a lot more time on this. But picture an iceberg. A lot of the process is out of sight. An entrepreneur can spend just as much time or more time preparing. Basically, what's this deal about? What do we really need? What's our plan B? Who's going to negotiate for us? Who's on our team? Is it just Jane? Is it Jane and her co-founders? Is it not Jane for whatever reason? It's going to be somebody else on her team doing the lead in the negotiating. It's figuring that stuff out at the beginning, and without yet engaging with the other side, with the bigger player. What do you think they're going to do? Who are they going to bring to the table? Setting the stage is now you're engaging with that bigger player, but you're not haggling yet. You're not bargaining. You're not doing the give and take. That's the making the deal stage. The making the deal stage is what people think of as negotiating. My definition is broader. And then closing the deal is bringing the process to an end, knowing when enough is enough, and knowing when you've achieved your goals and just saying, okay, we're done, right? And then documenting it, money, documents, widgets, whatever, changing hands. That's the closing the deal part. A lot of the art here, particularly for a smaller player, is knowing when you've achieved your goals and be happy with the results. Okay. I mentioned that every one of the parties can have its own strategy to this, but something that's common is the tactics. The point of this is not to demonstrate or to explain all these tactics. It would take a long time. And again, in longer workshops that I do, I would have I would be demonstrating the tactics with you all, and everybody would be trying stuff out with each other, as well as we'd be negotiating real deals with each other. We just don't have time for that. The point is this. These tactics exist. There are 25, 26 tactics on this slide. Any party can use these tactics, whether you're a big player or a little player. These tools are available to you as an entrepreneur to go up against the big players. Of course, the question is knowing when to use them and being good at using them. And so this is where we come back down to sort of the reality that even if you have a very strategically thinking entrepreneur and the person has a very well-conceived plan, really understands the process, no, you're still not going to be equal. So how can you basically frame your disadvantages or turn them into opportunities for the bigger player? Here's just one example. I'm just going to give you a couple. Here's one. So instead of pretending as the little entrepreneur you have as much capital as the big entrepreneur, the big player, or big entrepreneur, basically say, yeah, look, we don't have much money, okay? But here's an opportunity for you, big player, to invest in our development. If you help us develop this app, this software, this widget, this new material, maybe it could be yours, or maybe we can give you an exclusive in your industry. So instead of pretending or being ashamed about your own capital situation, frame it as an opportunity for the other side. Likewise, your lack of experience in this. You can frame that as, look, we think we're onto something here. We're not really sure the best way to do this. We're open to your input. And basically, you're playing to the ego of the bigger player. Oh, you want our advice, do you? Sure. Don't be ashamed about the fact maybe you haven't sold anything yet. Again, you can turn this into, yeah, we're so proud we haven't sold anything. Isn't that great? No, it's rather, we're still putting the finishing touches on this. We can do different adaptations of this, different versions. What would you like to see? What kind of version would you like to see? What do you think others out there might like to see? So you can frame it that way. And once you have this sort of framing, you're now basically anchoring the perspective of the bigger player about the negotiation. Here's another example, maybe counterintuitive one. Oops. This isn't displaying right, so I will tell you, I don't know why. Let's try it one more time. Okay, sorry about that. It's what this was supposed to show you is Sobe, the beverage company, little player, going up against big player, Coca-Cola, and basically Coke saying, we may be interested in buying you. The strategy here was put two big players in the room and have them negotiating with each other, and it became a bidding war. Pepsi outbid Coke, and they went back and forth, but it may be a little bit counterintuitive for a small player negotiating with the big player to bring in another big player, but actually it made the outcome much better for the little player because the big players, again, just ratcheted everything up. So those are just two examples. Doesn't always work, won't always apply. Let me start wrapping things up by giving you what I see as some best practices that can apply whether you're the little player or the big player. Actually, in bigger sessions, I have 10. I have these 10 traits, I have 10 do's, and I have 10 don'ts. Since this is a very abbreviated version, I'm doing 5, 5, and 5. I've used the word negotiation, I don't know, probably 100 times already in the last few minutes. And I'm sure you all have your own definition of what that word means. If I were to ask you what is your definition and call on each one of you, there'd probably be some blank stares. You're not really sure how to articulate it. Well, here's my definition. When I'm using the word negotiation, this is it. And I would suggest to you that the effective negotiators I see view negotiation this way. It's an interactive process, iterative. You sometimes go back and forth in it. It's not always linear. But in the iterations, it's getting better and better, closer and closer to your goals. Sometimes it truly is repetitive, not iterative, meaning you're going around in circles, you're getting nowhere. But hopefully it's iterative. You heard during a previous panel a very interesting one about regarding humane cities, about the importance of communication. From a negotiator's perspective, I would also suggest that equally or more important than communications themselves are the changes in communications. Those of you you view yourselves as the entrepreneur, the sort of the little player going up against the big player, pay very close attention to the changes in communication. Who's doing the talking, if that changed? How they're communicating? Did it go from email to phone call? Are they now saying, you know what, instead of all these emails back and forth, let's have a meeting and sit down and discuss it? That change in communication signals important things in a negotiation. Another way the little guy can start getting power and influence over the big guy is to start saying, oh, you know what, we agree on a couple of things. Don't emphasize the disagreements, that still remain. Emphasize the agreements that you've achieved. And now you're basically indicating with the bigger player, hey, we're scoring points too. We're scoring points together. We actually can do this. So emphasize the areas of agreement. Some do's. By know your stuff, what I'm referring to is don't just do your homework, which is on the previous slide, but stay on top of the information, the facts, the positioning, the issues, all these things. You need to stay on top of it. Continue to prepare, basically. Continue to do your homework during the negotiations. And you'll impress the bigger party that you know what you're doing. One other point I want to make on the slide is, and I know you all can read it, is there's something bringing everybody to the table, whether you're the little player or the big player. Be alert to pressure. There's something motivating the big player too. You've gotten their attention somehow, and of course you're under pressure too. Entrepreneurs shouldn't think they're the only ones under pressure, that we're running out of money, I can't pay the phone bill, we're going to have to lay people off, or we're already laying people off, we really need to do something fast, whatever it is. Yes, you're under pressure. Be alert to your own pressure and how it's coming out in the negotiation, but keep in mind, the other parties have pressure too. They have their own pressures. Some don'ts. A couple important takeaways here. The entrepreneurs who rush through a negotiation and want to get to a deal fast and basically say, we're just down to one thing. We're down to price, or we're down to how many we're going to deliver by when. We're just down to one deal point. Don't do that. You're making your life very difficult when you get down to one thing, 1 point. Keep 2 points open. It's much easier to negotiate 2 points than 1 point. So keep the two. You have something to trade. Somebody can win on one, somebody else can win on the other. Also, we entrepreneurs are very proud of what we've created, like Sagru. We get very involved in it. And that's, entrepreneurs are supposed to be passionate, right? Be careful about how that passion plays out in a negotiation. Be careful about taking personal offense at when somebody says, well, I think your invention's stupid. Who would want that? Or, yeah, you've coded this interesting app, but we have a team of IT people here. We have 300 people on our IT team. They could do this too. Why should we license yours? You want to say, well, if your 300 people were so smart, they would have done this already, and they haven't. I mean, be careful about how you let your emotions get involved in this. So, coming back to this original photo, remember the little guy? Now this little guy has all these things going on in his head. He has a framework. He has a different vision, and then instead of just there, okay, I'm now in a negotiating setting, and there's this really big opponent. Now it's not so intimidating. The entrepreneur has a way of viewing the big opponent in a different light. So there's David having conquered Goliath. That's a somewhat wrong imagery here. It's not about the entrepreneur knocking out the big player, but it is about being able to do business effectively and to get something when you felt like something positive, when you felt like you had nothing to going into this. And here's my email address if anybody wants to contact, and I'll be around if anyone wants to talk. So thank you.
Thanks, Rhett. Please join us.
Yep.
And yeah, sure. So here's your image. We've got the negotiating fox and Nancy the actress. So I'm going with the fox for you. I'm pretty sure.
I think that's right.
And then we've got the maker kit for you as well. Great. So you can make one of these giant balloons, which looks like a lot of fun.